The crystal chandelier suspended above the grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel looked like a million frozen tears catching the ambient light. Below it, 400 of Chicago's most influential business elites, politicians, and beauty industry moguls mingled, their laughter mingling with the soft jazz played by a live quartet in the corner. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated with silver trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that cost more per bite than my first weekly grocery budget. It was the 30th anniversary of Crown & Roots Heritage, my company, my life's work. I stood near the ice sculpture that bore our intricate logo, a silhouette of a woman with a majestic afro intertwined with deep, sprawling tree roots, and took a slow sip of sparkling water. At 68, my knees didn't tolerate 4-inch heels the way they used to, but tonight I was wearing a custom emerald green silk gown, and my posture was as straight as it had been 3 decades ago. My hair, a proud crown of silver and iron gray locks, was pinned up elegantly. I smiled and nodded as people passed by, accepting their congratulations. "Magnificent event, Beatrice," a state senator said, pressing my hand warmly. "You've built an absolute empire." "Thank you, Senator. God is good, and the community has been faithful," I replied smoothly. But as I watched the crowd, a quiet, heavy ache settled right beneath my breastbone. I was the guest of honor, the founder, the face on the original vintage labels, but standing in that room, I had never felt more like a ghost. My gaze drifted across the sea of designer suits and evening gowns until it landed on him. Julian, my son. He was 34 now, wearing a bespoke tuxedo that hugged his broad shoulders perfectly. He had his father's deep, warm mahogany complexion and my eyes, but the man he had become felt like a stranger dressed in my son's skin. He was laughing at something the regional director of a massive retail conglomerate was saying, and standing right beside him, her hand draped possessively over his forearm, was Chloe. My daughter-in-law wore a sleek, minimalist white gown that looked like liquid pearl. Her hair was bone straight, sweeping down her back, and her smile was practiced, flawless, and completely hollow. She was 32, a former Wall Street mergers and acquisitions shark who spoke in algorithms, synergies, and market penetrations. When Julian first brought her home to our house in Hyde Park 5 years ago, I tried to love her. I really did. I saw how my son looked at her, like she was the sun and the moon, and what mother doesn't want her child to be happy? But as I watched Chloe whisper something into Julian's ear, making him nod eagerly and turn his back slightly toward the room, the memory of how this all started washed over me. It didn't begin with a hostile takeover. It didn't begin with raised voices or dramatic betrayals. It began with a slow, creeping rot, dressed up as love and progress. 30 years ago, there were no crystal chandeliers. There was only the peeling yellow linoleum floor of my tiny kitchen in South Chicago, the suffocating heat of a sweltering July, and a grief so profound I thought it would physically crush my chest. My husband, Robert, had died suddenly of a massive heart attack on the factory floor where he worked as a line supervisor. He was a good man, a hard-working man, but he left me with a 4-year-old boy, a stack of medical bills from his brief time in the ICU, and a mortgage we were already 2 months behind on. The life insurance policy barely covered the funeral. I was 38, terrified, and desperate. I took a job cleaning offices downtown at night, leaving Julian with my neighbor, Miss Hattie, while I scrubbed floors until my knuckles bled. But the math never worked out. The bills kept mounting. The stress began to take a physical toll. My hair, my beautiful thick hair, began to fall out in clumps. Every time I ran a comb through it, my hands would come away full of broken strands. The chemical relaxers and cheap petroleum-laden greases from the corner drugstore only made it worse, burning my scalp until it was raw. One Sunday, after church, an older woman named Mother Williams pulled me aside. She saw my thinning edges, saw the exhaustion etched into my face, and handed me a small, unmarked brown glass jar. "My grandmother brought this knowledge up from Louisiana," she told me gently. "It ain't pretty, and it smells like the earth, but it heals." It was raw, unrefined shea butter mixed with a few essential oils. It worked miracles on my scalp, but Mother Williams passed away a few months later, taking her exact ratios with her. Desperate to keep my hair from falling out again, I started experimenting in my kitchen. I ordered raw shea butter, castor oil, sweet almond oil, and pure peppermint. I ruined dozens of pots. I burned my fingers. I stayed up until 3 in the morning, night after night, while Julian slept in the next room, whipping and melting and mixing. Finally, I found it. The perfect blend. The golden ratio that not only restored my hair, but made it flourish. It was thick, rich, and smelled of earth and sweet orange. I gave a little jar to Miss Hattie, then to the ladies in the church choir. Within a month, people were knocking on my door, holding out crumpled $5 bills, asking for Bee's Magic Butter. That was the seed. I didn't have business degrees. I didn't have investors. I had a kitchen stove, a wooden spoon, and a survival instinct that burned hotter than a furnace. I started buying ingredients in bulk. I filled mason jars and hand-wrote the labels. Julian, at barely 6 years old, would sit at the kitchen table and help me stick the labels on straight. "We're building an empire, baby," I would tell him, kissing his forehead as my hands slipped from the oils. "Mama's going to make sure you never have to worry about a thing." From the kitchen, we moved to a rented garage. From the garage, a small warehouse. From selling out of the trunk of my car at local hair shows, we expanded to beauty supply stores across the Midwest. Crown & Roots Heritage wasn't just a brand, it was a promise. A promise to Black women that they didn't have to put toxic chemicals on their crowns, that our natural roots were beautiful and worthy of premium care. I built the company brick by agonizing brick. I missed school plays to negotiate with suppliers. I skipped meals to ensure payroll was met for my first 3 employees. I poured every ounce of my youth, my energy, and my soul into that company so that when Julian grew up, he would have a legacy. I sent him to private schools. I paid for his undergraduate degree in full. When he got accepted to Harvard Business School, I cried tears of pure joy, thinking that all those late nights in the kitchen had finally paid off. He was going to take the foundation I laid and build a skyscraper. And then he brought Chloe into the picture. "Mom, Chloe thinks we have a massive untapped market demographic," Julian had said over Sunday dinner just 6 months after their extravagant wedding. A wedding I paid for, a lavish affair in the Hamptons that felt completely disconnected from our roots. I was serving collard greens and roast, the steam rising between us. Chloe sat there, picking at her food, her manicured nails tapping against the side of her crystal water glass. "Julian speaks the truth, Beatrice," Chloe chimed in, her voice smooth and modulated. She rarely called me Mom. It was always Beatrice, or sometimes, when she was feeling particularly patronizing, Mother Washington. "Your story is quaint. It's a lovely grassroots narrative, but the packaging is dated. The branding is, well, it's very niche. If we want to secure placement in premium national retailers, we need to sanitize the aesthetic, make it more universal." Sanitize? The word tasted foul in my mouth. "My face is on that label, Chloe. The story of how this company started in a South Chicago kitchen is why our customers trust us. They know I made this for them." "And that's beautiful for a small mom-and-pop shop," Chloe replied, offering that condescending smile that never reached her cold, calculating eyes. "But Julian and I have been running the projections. If we rebrand, change the packaging to a sleek minimalist design, and drop the heritage from the name, we can appeal to a broader, crossover demographic. We're leaving millions on the table." Julian had looked at me then, his eyes wide and eager, like a little boy waiting for a gold star. "She's right, Mom. The data backs it up. We need to evolve. You've taken us as far as the traditional model can go. Let me and Chloe take the wheel for the next phase." That was the first paper cut, the first tiny bleed that I ignored because it came from the son I adored. I compromised. I let them handle the rebranding of a single product line, but give a shark a taste of blood, and they will circle back for the entire feast. Over the next 2 years, the changes came faster, slicker, and always cloaked in the language of corporate growth and optimization. Chloe officially joined the company as Chief Marketing Officer. Within 6 months, her office was twice the size of mine. Then came the displacement of my loyal soldiers. Denise Carter had been with me since the rented garage days. She was my director of operations, a woman who knew the exact viscosity our shea butter needed to reach before it was ready to be jarred. She knew the temperature of every vat, the name of every line worker, and the heart of the business. One Tuesday morning, I walked into the factory office to find Denise packing a cardboard box. Her eyes were red, her mouth set in a hard, tight line. "Denise, what in God's name are you doing?" I asked, my heart dropping to my stomach. She looked up at me, holding a framed picture of the two of us from our first trade show in Atlanta. "I've been optimized, Bea." "What are you talking about?" "Your daughter-in-law and your son. Denise's voice cracked, but she swallowed hard, refusing to let the tears fall. They called me in this morning, told me my skills are redundant in the new automated supply chain matrix. They offered me a severance package with a non-disclosure agreement thicker than a phone book. No, absolutely not, I said, my blood boiling. I am the CEO. I make the hiring and firing decisions. Put that box down. I am going to talk to Julian right now. I marched down the hallway, my heels clicking furiously against the polished concrete floor. I threw open the glass door to Julian's new hyper-modern corner office. Chloe was sitting on the edge of his desk, reviewing something on a tablet. What is the meaning of this? I demanded, not caring how loud my voice was. Denise Carter helped me build this company when you were still in short pants, Julian. You do not fire her. Julian actually flinched, looking down at his desk like a scolded child. But Chloe didn't miss a beat. She set the tablet down slowly, her posture perfectly relaxed. Beatrice, please lower your voice. The glass walls aren't entirely soundproof, Chloe said, her tone dripping with corporate HR calm. We discussed this in the executive committee meeting on Thursday, the one you missed because you were visiting your sister in Detroit. I read the minutes from that meeting. There was nothing about firing Denise. It was under the organizational restructuring addendum, Chloe countered smoothly. Denise is a wonderful woman, but she operates on intuition and archaic methods. We are moving to a fully integrated AI-driven inventory and production software. Denise doesn't even know how to use an Excel pivot table properly. We brought in a supply chain expert from a major tech firm to replace her. It's for the good of the company. The company is its people, I fired back, looking directly at my son. Julian, tell me you didn't agree to this. Tell me you didn't look Denise in the eye and fire her after she used to babysit you in the warehouse. Julian finally looked up. His eyes were defensive, masked with a coldness I was beginning to realize he had learned from his wife. Mom, it's business. We have to separate emotion from operations. Denise was a bottleneck. We gave her a very generous severance. 2 years of salary. We took care of her. You bought her silence, you mean? I stared at the man behind the desk, searching for the boy who used to help me stick labels on mason jars. He was gone. Rehire her, Julian. Today. I can't, he said quietly. The new director is already signing his contract. I stood there, the realization washing over me like ice water. They had planned it perfectly. They waited until I was out of town. They buried the decision in corporate jargon. They executed it before I could intervene. I should have fought harder. I should have fired Chloe on the spot and stripped Julian of his title. But he was my son, my only child, the only family I had left. I told myself it was growing pains. I told myself that new generations have to make their own mark. I swallowed the bitter pill of Denise's departure, apologizing to her with tears in my eyes, promising her I would make sure she was taken care of personally. That was my fatal mistake, my maternal blind spot. I thought they were just being aggressive young executives. I didn't realize they were systematically clearing the board of anyone loyal to me, isolating me on my own throne. The real trap, the one that broke my back, was set a year later, during a period when I was genuinely distracted. My younger sister had been diagnosed with breast cancer, and I was spending weeks at a time flying back and forth to Detroit to be with her during her chemotherapy. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and relying heavily on Julian to manage the day-to-day operations of Crown and Roots. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon in late October. I was in my office, packing my briefcase to catch a flight to Detroit, my mind heavy with worry about my sister's declining health. There was a soft knock on the door, and Julian entered, flanked by Chloe and a man I didn't recognize. The man was in his 50s, wearing a sharp, dark suit, carrying a thick leather briefcase. "Mom, do you have 20 minutes?" Julian asked, his voice gentle, almost hesitant. "I have a flight in 2 hours, Julian." "What is this?" I asked, checking my watch. "I know, Beatrice, and we wouldn't bother you if it wasn't time-sensitive." Chloe stepped forward, her voice a masterclass in feigned empathy. "This is Arthur Vance. He's a senior partner at a wealth management firm downtown." "Mr." Vance extended a manicured hand. "A pleasure, Mrs. Washington. I've admired your business acumen for years." I shook his hand briefly, my defenses immediately going up. "I already have an estate lawyer, Julian. Sterling Hayes has handled my affairs for 20 years. "I know, Mom, and Sterling is great for basic stuff," Julian said, stepping closer to my desk. He looked tired, rubbing the back of his neck. "But Crown and Roots has grown beyond Sterling's scope. We're valued at nearly $80 million now. With Auntie's illness, it really made Chloe and me think about the future, about protecting you and protecting the legacy. What does my sister's cancer have to do with the business? I asked, my voice hardening. Chloe sighed, a soft, sympathetic sound that made my skin crawl. Beatrice, God forbid something happens to you, the estate taxes alone would completely gut the company. The federal government would take nearly half of everything you've built. Julian would be forced to sell off major assets, maybe even the core brand, just to pay the tax bill. We can't let the government dismantle your life's work. Mr. Vance has designed a strategy, Julian added, pulling a thick stack of documents from the lawyer's briefcase and placing them on my desk. It's a family-limited partnership and an irrevocable heritage trust. It essentially locks your assets in a protective vault. It shields the company from predatory taxes and ensures that the wealth stays entirely within the family, no matter what happens. I looked at the mountain of legal jargon, hundreds of pages of dense, tiny text. I am not signing something I haven't read, Julian, and I'm certainly not signing it without Sterling reviewing it. Mom, Sterling doesn't understand corporate tax shelters of this magnitude, Julian pleaded, his brown eyes wide and earnest. And we have a deadline. The tax laws are changing at the end of the fiscal year, which is next week. If we don't file the trust documents by tomorrow, we lose the grandfathered exemption. We're talking about a potential loss of $20 million in tax liabilities. He's right, Mrs. Washington, Mr. Vance chimed in smoothly. This is standard operating procedure for high net worth individuals transitioning their legacy to the next generation. You maintain your title as founder. Nothing changes in your day-to-day life. It simply places a legal umbrella over the assets. I hesitated. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text from my niece saying my sister was having a bad reaction to the chemo and was asking for me. My heart pulled violently in two directions. The company, my family, my son standing in front of me, looking so much like his late father, asking me to trust him. Just the signature pages, Mom, Julian said softly, placing a heavy Mont Blanc pen next to the documents. I swear to you, this is just to protect what you built for us, for our future. I would never do anything to hurt you. You know that, right? Did I know that? I looked into his eyes. I remembered the little boy who used to wipe my tears when the bank threatened to foreclose on our house. I remembered the teenager who promised he would make me proud. I was so tired, so distracted by the grief of my sister's illness. Where do I sign? I whispered. Chloe stepped forward instantly, efficient and precise, flipping the heavy pages to the signature lines. Right here, Beatrice, and here. Initial here. One more on the back page. I signed my name 12 times, 12 strokes of ink, 12 nails in my own coffin. Thank you, Mom, Julian said, hugging me tightly. For a second, I felt his heart beating against mine, and I let myself relax. I was a mother taking care of her son. That was all. Have a safe flight, Beatrice, Chloe said, sweeping the documents into the briefcase with a speed that, looking back now, should have set off every alarm bell in my soul. They left the office. I packed my bag and flew to Detroit. It took 2 years for the poison to fully infect the host. With the trust in place, the shifts in power became blatant. I noticed it first in the meetings. I would make a strategic suggestion, perhaps expanding our community outreach program or sourcing a new organic supplier from Ghana. Julian would nod, write it down, and then nothing would happen. When I followed up, Chloe would interject. We ran the numbers on that, Beatrice. The ROI doesn't justify the expenditure. The board decided to table it. The board. I used to be the board. Now there were 5 other people sitting around that massive mahogany table. 2 of them were former colleagues of Chloe's from Wall Street. One was the tech guy they hired to replace Denise. Julian sat at the head of the table. I sat on the side. My corporate credit card limit was quietly reduced. Standard security protocol for all executives, the new CFO had explained without making eye contact with me. My access to the live inventory and financial dashboards on the company server was revoked. System upgrades, Chloe told me in passing. We're moving to a tiered security clearance. Julian and I have top-level access to manage the daily operations. I'll have my assistant print you a weekly summary report. The weekly summaries were vague, glossy overviews that told me nothing about the real health of the company. I was being erased. Slowly, methodically, completely. They kept me around for photo ops. They trotted me out for magazine interviews about black female entrepreneurship because the media loved my rags to riches story. I was the mascot of my own empire. But standing here tonight, at the 30th anniversary gala, the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The music swelled. A spotlight cut through the dim ballroom, illuminating the grand stage at the far end of the room. The chatter died down as Julian stepped up to the microphone, adjusting his tie, looking every inch the young visionary CEO. Chloe stood slightly behind him, her face arranged in an expression of perfect, adoring support. "Good evening, everyone," Julian's voice boomed through the state-of-the-art sound system. The crowd applauded warmly. 30 years ago, Crown & Roots was born from a place of necessity, of struggle, and of profound love. It was born in a kitchen not far from here. He gestured toward me and the spotlight swung around, blinding me for a moment. The crowd clapped louder. I maintained my smile, raising my glass slightly, playing the part they needed me to play. The proud, aging matriarch. "My mother, Beatrice Washington, is a pioneer," Julian continued, his voice thick with what sounded like genuine emotion. "She broke barriers. She created a space for our community when the industry ignored us. We owe her everything." More applause. I felt a knot form in my throat. Was I wrong? Was I just an old woman refusing to let go of the reins? Maybe Julian really did just want to protect the legacy. "But," Julian said, the word hanging in the air heavily. The spotlight shifted back to him. "To honor a legacy, you must ensure it survives the future. The beauty industry is changing at lightning speed. Global markets, digital integration, aggressive expansion. What got us here over the last 30 years is not what will take us through the next 30. I saw Chloe step up beside him, taking the microphone. "That is why." Chloe's voice was sharp, crystalline, cutting through the warm acoustics of the room. "Tonight is not just a celebration of the past. It is the dawn of a new era. We are thrilled to announce that Crown & Roots Heritage is officially rebranding to C&R Global." A murmur rippled through the crowd. They were dropping this word heritage. They were dropping the roots. "And as we step into this aggressive new global strategy," Chloe continued, her eyes finding mine in the crowd. They were flat, triumphant, and utterly merciless. "We must acknowledge that such demanding growth requires new energy. Beatrice Washington has given her life to this company. She has sacrificed more than anyone should have to, and it is with the deepest respect and gratitude that the board of directors announces her official transition into a well-deserved permanent retirement." The ballroom went dead silent. I stopped breathing. The glass of sparkling water in my hand trembled, the ice clinking loudly against the crystal in the sudden quiet. Permanent retirement. Julian took the microphone back, refusing to look in my direction. He stared straight ahead at the cameras at the back of the room. "My mother will retain the honorary title of Founder Emeritus, and we will be establishing a scholarship fund in her name. Please join me in a round of applause for the woman who started it all, as she steps down to finally enjoy the rest she has earned." He raised his glass. Chloe raised hers. Around me, people began to clap. Not the enthusiastic, warm applause from before, but a confused, polite, hesitant clapping. The state senator next to me looked at me with a mixture of shock and pity. They weren't honoring me. They were firing me. Live, in front of 400 people, in front of the press, they were amputating me from the body of my own company, wrapping it in a bow of public gratitude so I couldn't scream without looking like a bitter, unhinged old woman. A security guard in a dark suit, a man I had never seen before, materialized quietly at my left elbow. Another appeared at my right. "Mrs. Washington," the taller one murmured, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "We have a private car waiting at the side exit to take you home. Let's not make a scene." A scene. I looked up at the stage. Chloe was smiling, a tight, victorious smirk that she didn't even try to hide from me. Julian was looking down at his shoes. They had taken my life's work. They had taken my dignity. They thought they had backed an old, tired widow into a corner where her only option was to bow her head and fade into obscurity. They forgot one fundamental truth. I didn't build an empire by being polite. I built it by surviving fires that would have burned lesser people to ash. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my drink. I slowly lowered my glass to the tray of a passing waiter. I reached into my beaded clutch and pulled out the solid gold access card that served as the master key to the executive suite. I dropped it onto the floor. The heavy metal made a sharp clack against the marble. I looked up at the stage, meeting Chloe's victorious gaze, and I didn't smile. I let 30 years of South Chicago grit, 30 years of calloused hands and sleepless nights, rise to the surface of my eyes. I turned to the security guard. "You don't need to escort me. I know the way out of the building I bought." I walked toward the exit, my back perfectly straight, my head held high. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea, the applause dying away completely, replaced by a thick, suffocating tension. As I pushed through the heavy brass doors of the ballroom and stepped out into the cool, damp Chicago night air, I didn't feel defeated. I felt a cold, terrifying clarity. They thought they had won the war by taking the castle. They didn't realize I still owned the ground it was built on, and it was time to burn it all down to save it. The drive back to my house in Hyde Park was a blur of neon lights, rain-slicked streets, and a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight sitting on my chest. I didn't cry. The shock was too absolute, too freezing to allow for tears. I walked into my empty foyer, kicked off my custom emerald heels, and stood in the dark. For 30 years, my mind had been a relentless engine. Ingredients, margins, distribution networks, payroll. Now there was only a looping playback of my son's voice echoing through that ballroom. Permanent retirement. Transition. C&R Global. I didn't sleep. I sat in my wingback chair by the window, watching the sun drag itself up over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and gray. By 7 a.m., the numbness had worn off, replaced by a slow, simmering heat in my blood. They had ambushed me in public because they thought the humiliation would paralyze me. They thought I would retreat to my garden and quietly accept my gold watch. They were wrong. At 8:30 a.m., I walked through the sliding glass doors of the Crown and Roots headquarters, a sleek 40,000-square-foot facility in the West Loop that I had personally scouted, negotiated, and purchased. I ignored the nervous greeting of the young receptionist and marched straight toward the private elevator that led to the executive suites. I tapped my gold access card against the scanner. A red light blinked. Access denied. I tried again. Access denied. "Mrs. Washington?" I turned. Standing near the security desk was a young man in a tailored suit, looking incredibly uncomfortable. He was part of Chloe's new talent acquisition team. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your credentials were deactivated at midnight. Company policy for transitioning personnel." "Company policy?" I echoed, my voice dangerously soft. "I built this company. I own this building." Before the young man could stammer out a reply, the elevator doors chimed open. Chloe stepped out, holding a steaming cup of artisan coffee, looking as rested and immaculate as if she hadn't just publicly executed her mother-in-law the night before. "Beatrice, I didn't expect to see you here today," Chloe said, her voice echoing in the marble lobby. "We arranged for a courier to deliver your personal effects to your home this afternoon." "My personal effects?" I took a step toward her. The security guard shifted nervously, but I didn't care. "You think you can just pack up 30 years of my life in a cardboard box, Chloe? I am still the majority shareholder. I am the founder. I demand a board meeting right here, right now. Where is Julian?" Chloe took a slow sip of her coffee, completely unbothered. "Julian is on a conference call with our new packaging distributors in Shenzhen. And as for a board meeting, Beatrice, you don't have the authority to call one. Not anymore. I hold 60% of the company's equity. I have every authority." Chloe offered me that same hollow, patronizing smile she had worn at the gala. "You hold equity, yes. But equity is just money, Beatrice. It isn't power. You don't have the voting rights. You haven't had them for 2 years. Now please don't make me have security escort you out. It would be terrible for your blood pressure." I stared at her, the air suddenly growing thin. Voting rights. The words triggered a cold, terrifying memory. A rainy afternoon, my sister's cancer diagnosis, a stack of legal documents and my son's earnest, pleading eyes. "Just the signature pages, Mom." I didn't say another word to Chloe. I turned on my heel, walked out the glass doors, got into my car, and drove straight to downtown Chicago. Sterling Hayes' law office smelled of old leather bindings, lemon polish, and the comforting scent of a man who had spent 40 years fighting corporate battles. Sterling was 70, with a sharp mind and a quiet, imposing dignity. He had known my late husband. He had drawn up my very first LLC paperwork when I was still cooking shea butter in my kitchen. I bypassed his secretary and walked right into his office, dropping my handbag onto his desk. "B? Good Lord, I saw the news alerts this morning," Sterling said, standing up quickly, his brow furrowed in deep concern. "The press release said you stepped down due to failing health. Are you all right?" "I am perfectly healthy, Sterling, and I didn't step down. I was pushed." I sat in the heavy leather chair across from him, my hands trembling for the first time since the gala. Chloe said something about voting rights. 2 years ago, Julian brought in a wealth manager, Arthur Vance. They had me sign documents to create an irrevocable heritage trust. They told me it was to protect the company from estate taxes because of my sister's illness. Sterling's face went completely still. He slowly sank back into his chair. "Arthur Vance, from Vanguard and Kincaid?" "Yes. You know him?" "I know of him. He's a corporate hitman, B. He specializes in hostile family takeovers." Sterling grabbed his reading glasses, his hands moving quickly across his keyboard. "I need you to tell me exactly what you signed." "I don't know," I admitted, the shame burning hot in my cheeks. "It was hundreds of pages. I was distracted. Julian told me it was just a tax shelter. I trusted my son, Sterling." "Give me 10 minutes to pull the corporate filings," Sterling muttered, his eyes glued to his dual monitors. Those 10 minutes felt like a decade. I watched the second hand of the grandfather clock in the corner tick away, each click a reminder of my own naive, maternal blindness. I had been a shark in the boardroom with suppliers and distributors, but I had left my armor at the door when it came to my own flesh and blood. When the printer in the corner finally whirred to life, spitting out a thick stack of paper, Sterling didn't say anything at first. He just read. As he flipped the pages, his expression darkened, the deep lines around his mouth tightening into a grimace. He took off his glasses and looked at me, his eyes full of a devastating pity. "B, I am so sorry." "Give it to me straight, Sterling. No legal jargon." He sighed, leaning forward and folding his hands on the desk. "It wasn't a tax shelter. It's a guillotine. You did create a trust, and technically, your shares are inside it, which means you still own the financial value of the company. But you signed over the administration of that trust to a corporate board." "Chloe's board," I whispered, the pieces violently clicking into place. "Exactly. You transferred 80% of your executive voting rights to them. You gave them the legal authority to make all structural, operational, and personnel decisions without your consent. They can fire you. They can rebrand. They can sell the whole damn company if they want to, and legally, your signature is on the document saying you agree to it." The room spun. I gripped the armrests of my chair to ground myself. "But it was obtained under false pretenses. They lied to me. Can't we sue them for fraud?" "We can," Sterling said carefully. "But it would be a bloodbath, B. It would take years. It would cost millions in legal fees. Arthur Vance drafts these documents to be bulletproof. A judge is going to look at this and see a seasoned CEO who signed a contract, proving verbal manipulation by your own son. It's going to be a brutal, public spectacle. It will destroy Julian's life, and it might destroy Crown and Roots in the process." I closed my eyes. They had boxed me in perfectly. They knew I wouldn't drag my own son through a criminal fraud trial. They knew I loved the company too much to let a public legal war tear it to shreds. "So I've lost," I said, the words tasting like ash. "I built an empire, and I handed them the keys." "Legally? Yes. They have the castle," Sterling said softly. I left Sterling's office feeling like a hollow shell. I drove to the south side, parking near the lake. I sat in my car for hours, watching the gray water violently crash against the concrete barriers. I thought about Robert. I thought about the days when Julian was small, sleeping on a pile of coats in the warehouse while I packed boxes. I had done everything for him. I had given him the world, and he had used it to buy my execution. My phone buzzed in the center console. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Finally, I picked it up. It was an unknown number. "Hello? B, it's Denise." Hearing the voice of my old director of operations, the friend Julian and Chloe had unceremoniously fired a year ago, made a fresh wave of guilt wash over me. "Denise, I'm so sorry. I saw the news. They locked me out." "I know," Denise said, her voice tight, urgent, and completely devoid of pity. "Listen to me. You sitting around feeling sorry for yourself? Because you don't have time for that. I need you to meet me, now, at the old diner on 47th Street. And B, make sure you aren't being followed. 40 minutes later, I slid into a cracked vinyl booth at a rundown diner that smelled of stale coffee and frying grease. It was the same diner where Denise and I used to sit at 2 a.m. 30 years ago, drinking black coffee and trying to figure out how to pay our first suppliers. Denise was already there. She looked older, tired, but there was a fierce, dangerous fire in her eyes. She didn't offer a hug or pleasantries. She slid a thick, unlabeled manila folder across the sticky Formica table. "Open it," she commanded. I opened the folder. Inside were dozens of pages of internal company emails, shipping manifests, and what looked like independent laboratory reports. "What is this, Denise? How did you get this?" "I still have friends in the warehouse, B. People who are loyal to you, not to the Ivy League brats who took over," Denise said, leaning in close, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You thought they fired me because I didn't know how to use a fancy Excel spreadsheet? You thought it was about modernization?" "That's what Chloe said." "Chloe is a snake," Denise spat. "They fired me because I was the only one in the executive suite who actually checked the supply chain. I was the only one who tasted the shea butter when it came off the boat. Look at the lab reports, B. Look at the dates. It started 3 months after they fired me." I flipped to the laboratory analysis. The document was dense with chemical breakdowns, but my eyes immediately caught the highlighted sections. Shea butter, Butyrospermum parkii, 12%. Mineral oil, 45%. Propylene glycol, synthetic fragrance number 409. Parabens. I stared at the page, my brain refusing to process the words. This is wrong. Our formula is 60% raw, unrefined African shea. We don't use mineral oil. We never use parabens. That's the whole point of our brand. That's the promise I made to our women." "Not anymore," Denise said grimly. Julian and Chloe quietly changed the suppliers. They cut the raw shea butter with cheap synthetic petroleum fillers. They swapped the pure essential oils for artificial fragrances made in a chemical plant. They took your golden formula and turned it into the exact same toxic garbage you started this company to fight against. My stomach lurched violently. A wave of physical nausea hit me so hard I had to put my hand over my mouth. I remembered the women in my church crying because chemical relaxers had burned their scalps bald. I remembered the promise I made to them. Crown and Roots is pure. It heals. "Why?" I gasped, looking up at Denise. "Why would they destroy the product? It's our reputation." "Look at the next page, the financial projections," Denise instructed. I flipped the page. It was a confidential internal memo drafted by Chloe. The math was sickeningly clear. By replacing the premium organic ingredients with cheap synthetics, they had slashed the production costs by 75%. But they kept the retail price exactly the same. "They inflated the profit margins," I whispered, the cold corporate logic revealing itself. "Exactly," Denise nodded. "They don't care about the product, B. They care about the EBITDA, the earnings before interest and taxes. By artificially inflating the profit margins, they made the company look like a gold mine on paper. And why do you do that?" "To sell it," I said, my voice hollow. "Bingo. They are prepping the company for an acquisition. I heard whispers from a friend at a brokerage firm. Chloe has been having secret meetings with executives from L'Eclat Beauté, that massive, soulless multinational conglomerate. They want to buy Crown and Roots to tap into the urban demographic, and Chloe and Julian are packaging it up to sell for $250 million. They were going to sell my legacy to a corporation that didn't care about our community. They were going to walk away with hundreds of millions of dollars, leaving my face on a bottle of chemicals that would slowly poison the women who trusted me. "But the customers," I said, my hands gripping the edges of the folder so hard my knuckles turned white. "Women know their hair. They know when a product changes. They have to be complaining." Denise's expression darkened even further. "Flip to the back of the folder." I did. There were printed screenshots of customer emails, pictures of women with red, inflamed scalps, pictures of broken, brittle hair. The complaints were devastating. "Your new batch burns. My daughter broke out in hives. What did you do to B's magic butter?" "Where are these?" I asked, my voice shaking with a rage so profound it felt like an earthquake in my chest. "Why didn't I see these?" "Chloe's marketing team intercepts them," Denise explained. "They wipe the negative comments off social media using bots. The severe cases, the chemical burns, Chloe pays them off. She throws $10,000 at them and makes them sign a strict non-disclosure agreement. She is burying the truth until the ink dries on the buyout contract with L'Eclat. I sat in the dim light of the diner, looking at the photos of those women. Black women. Women who looked like me. Women who looked like my sister. They trusted my name. They trusted the story of a mother in a South Chicago kitchen. And my son was using that trust to burn them, just to line his own pockets. The betrayal I felt earlier that morning, the pain of a mother rejected by her son, evaporated. It wasn't replaced by sadness. It was replaced by a cold, sharp, lethal clarity. Julian and Chloe hadn't just stolen my money. They hadn't just stolen my title. They had stolen my integrity. They were actively destroying my community to finance their Hamptons lifestyle. "B?" Denise asked softly, watching the change in my face. "What are we going to do?" I closed the manila folder. I placed my hands flat on the table. The shaking had completely stopped. I didn't feel 68 years old anymore. I felt exactly like the 38-year-old widow who had stood in a cramped kitchen, refusing to let the world crush her. "Sterling told me that they have the castle," I said to Denise, my voice steady, hard, and resolute. "He said they hold the voting rights. He said they legally control the company." "Do they?" Denise asked. I looked her dead in the eye, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. "They control the corporation, Denise. But they forgot one tiny, crucial detail from 30 years ago. A detail I never put into the corporate filings." Denise leaned forward, her eyes widening. "What detail?" "They think they own the formula. They think they own the ground the factory sits on." I tapped the folder. "They are about to find out that Beatrice Washington never gives away her roots. Get your coat, Denise. We're going back to Sterling's office. It's time to go to war." The blinding flashes of the press cameras created a strobe light effect across the grand ballroom, freezing the sheer terror on Julian's face in dozens of high-definition frames per second. Monsieur Laurent, the CEO of L'Eclat stood frozen, the thick dossier of my deeds and patents clutched in his manicured hands like a live grenade. "Julian," I said, my voice echoing through the sudden breathless hush of the room. I didn't look at Chloe. I looked only at the boy I had raised. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out what you did to the formula? Did you really think you could poison our people and hide it behind a sleek new marketing campaign?" Julian blinked, taking a step back until his hip hit the edge of the glass table. "Poison? Mom, what are you talking about? We optimized the supply chain. We brought the overhead down to scale for the acquisition." "You didn't optimize anything, Julian," Denise cut in, her voice booming with righteous, long-simmering fury. She stepped up beside me and pulled a stack of glossy, high-resolution photographs from her folder. Without waiting for permission, she began handing them out to the journalists in the front row. "You swapped premium organic African shea butter for synthetic petroleum fillers and artificial chemical fragrances. You slapped B's name on a bottle of toxic sludge to artificially inflate your profit margins so L'Eclat would buy you out." "That is a lie," Chloe shrieked, lunging toward the edge of the stage. Her liquid pearl gown tangled around her ankles, making her stumble. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at Denise. "That is corporate defamation. Security, confiscate those photos immediately. She is a disgruntled former employee making baseless accusations." But the journalists already had the photos. I watched as a seasoned financial reporter from the Wall Street Journal looked down at the image in her hands. It was a picture of a young black girl, maybe 10 years old, with severe weeping chemical burns across her scalp and hairline. A collective gasp rippled through the front row. The reporter looked up at Chloe, her expression morphing from professional curiosity to absolute disgust. "Is this true, Mrs. Washington?" the reporter shouted, thrusting a recorder toward the stage. "Did C&R Global knowingly distribute hazardous materials under a legacy organic label?" "No, of course not!" Chloe screamed, her eyes darting frantically around the room. She grabbed Julian's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his bespoke tuxedo jacket. "Julian, say something! Tell them she's insane!" Julian looked down at the photograph that a journalist had slapped onto the edge of the stage. He stared at the blistered skin of the little girl. The color completely drained from his face, leaving his mahogany skin an ashen, sickly gray. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked at Chloe, his eyes wide with a horrifying realization. "Chloe," Julian whispered, his voice trembling so violently the microphone barely picked it up. "You told me the new supplier was FDA approved. You told me the QA tests came back flawless. You handled the vendor transition." "I did! It's a setup!" Chloe spat, her chest heaving. She turned to Monsieur Laurent, her voice taking on a desperate, pleading pitch. "Laurent, please. This is a pathetic extortion attempt by a jealous mother who can't let go of power. We can resolve this privately. The term sheet is still valid." Monsieur Laurent looked at Chloe as if she were a venomous snake that had just slithered across his expensive Italian shoes. He dropped the dossier onto the glass table. "Madame, if L'Éclat Beauté attaches its name to a company facing a mass-action consumer fraud lawsuit, our global stock will plummet overnight," Laurent said, his thick French accent clipped and laced with pure ice. "You assured my legal team of your organic certifications. You assured us of the intellectual property rights. You have lied to my face, and you have attempted to make my corporation an accessory to a catastrophic liability." He turned to his own legal counsel, a severe-looking woman standing near the curtains. "Tear up the contract. We are done here. And contact our litigation department. I want every dime we spent on due diligence recouped from these charlatans." "Laurent, wait! Please!" Chloe begged, taking a step toward him. But the French billionaire didn't even look back. He strode off the stage and disappeared through the side exit, his entourage swarming around him like a protective shield. The room erupted into absolute chaos. Journalists began shouting questions, cameras flashed relentlessly, and the live-stream comments on the monitors behind the stage began scrolling so fast they were a blur of angry text. The acquisition was dead. The $250 million payday had just evaporated into thin air. But I wasn't finished. I hadn't come here just to kill a business deal. I came here to excise the cancer that had infected my family. "Sterling," I commanded, my voice slicing through the noise. Sterling Hayes stepped forward, unzipping the secondary compartment of his leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick-bound dossier adorned with the official seal of a licensed forensic accounting firm. "There's one more thing you need to know, Julian," I said, the ache in my chest growing heavier with every word. I looked at my son, who was gripping the edge of the table, looking like a man standing on the deck of a sinking ship. "You thought you were the CEO. You thought you were the mastermind behind this massive global expansion. But you were just the bait." "Bait?" Julian choked out, shaking his head. "Mom, I swear to God I didn't know about the burns. I didn't know the ingredients were toxic. Chloe handled the logistics, I handled the projections. And she handled your bank accounts," Sterling said loudly, holding up the dossier for the press to see. "We ran a forensic audit on the executive finances. We discovered a series of heavily encrypted wire transfers routed through a shell company in the Cayman Islands. A shell company registered to the maiden name of your wife, Chloe Sinclair." Chloe froze. The desperate, shrieking panic that had consumed her just moments ago vanished, replaced by a cold, rigid stillness. She stared at Sterling, her lips parted in shock. "Over the last 14 months, Sterling continued, his voice echoing like a gavel striking wood, Chloe Sinclair received a total of $3.2 million in undisclosed consulting fees. And do you want to know who paid her, Julian?" Julian turned his head slowly, looking at his wife. "Chloe, what is he talking about?" "The money," Sterling announced to the room, "was wired from a subsidiary of Apex Cosmetics, one of L'Éclat Beauté's biggest, most aggressive market competitors." The journalists collectively gasped. Pencils scribbled furiously. Recorders were shoved closer to the stage. This was no longer just a story about a family dispute or a faulty product. This was corporate espionage. "Apex paid your wife to act as a Trojan horse," Sterling explained, looking directly at Julian with a mixture of pity and legal severity. "Her mandate wasn't to grow Crown and Roots. Her mandate was to tank its intrinsic value. She systematically fired the loyal staff who protected the product. She swapped the organic ingredients for toxic sludge to destroy the brand's 30-year reputation in the community. She was paid to drive Crown and Roots into the ground from the inside so that Apex could eliminate its biggest competitor in the multicultural beauty space without ever having to compete with them on a shelf." Julian's eyes widened, a look of absolute, shattering devastation crossing his features. He looked at the bank statements Sterling held up. He saw the dates. He saw the massive deposits. Millions of dollars hidden away while he was proudly parading around, thinking he was a corporate genius. "The buyout with L'Éclat Beauté?" I added, my voice softening just a fraction as I watched my son's heart break in real time. That was just her exit strategy, Julian. She set you up to take the fall. When the mass lawsuits for the chemical burns inevitably hit, her name wouldn't be on the LLC's executive liability documents. Yours would be. She was going to take her offshore millions, file for divorce, and leave you holding the bag for consumer fraud and corporate bankruptcy. "Shut up!" Chloe suddenly screamed, her voice tearing through her throat. She slapped the glass table, her eyes wild, her flawless hair falling out of its sleek style and hanging in her face. She looked at Julian, grabbing his tuxedo lapels. "Julian, listen to me. She's manipulating the data. It's fake. She's trying to destroy our marriage because she's a bitter, jealous old woman who couldn't stand that you outgrew her." Julian looked down at his wife's hands clutching his lapels. For 5 years, he had hung on her every word. He had let her convince him that his mother's legacy was just a stepping stone. He had let her convince him that firing the women who practically raised him was necessary optimization. He had traded his heritage for a seat at a table that was built entirely on a lie. Slowly, deliberately, Julian reached up and wrapped his large hands around Chloe's wrists. "Let go of me," Julian whispered. "Julian, please." "I said let go of me!" Julian roared, violently shoving her hands away. The sheer force of his voice made Chloe stumble backward, her stiletto heel catching on the carpeted stage, sending her crashing to the floor. The cameras flashed wildly, capturing the literal fall of the architect of my destruction. Julian didn't help her up. He didn't even look at her. He turned to me, tears finally spilling over his dark eyelashes, tracking down his cheeks. He looked exactly like the 6-year-old boy who had broken my favorite vase and was waiting for the punishment he knew he deserved. "Mom!" Julian sobbed, his chest heaving. "Mom, I am so sorry. I didn't know. I swear to you on my life, I didn't know she was poisoning them. I just wanted to make it bigger. I just wanted to show you I could be the man you wanted me to be. I wanted to make you proud." The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the rapid clicks of the cameras. I looked at my son, my only child, the boy I had scrubbed floors for, the boy I had sacrificed my youth for. My heart screamed to run up those stairs, wrap my arms around him, and tell him everything was going to be all right. To shield him from the journalists, from the police, from the utter ruin of his own making. But I couldn't. If I saved him now, he would never learn the true weight of the legacy he had so carelessly discarded. "I was already proud of you, Julian," I said, my voice thick with unshed tears, yet steady enough to carry across the room. "I was proud of you when you were sleeping on a pile of coats in the warehouse. I was proud of you when you graduated. I didn't need you to give me a global conglomerate. I just needed you to protect the roots." Julian let out a ragged, heartbroken sob, burying his face in his hands. Behind him, Chloe scrambled to her feet. Her dress was wrinkled, her makeup slightly smudged, but her eyes were venomous. She realized the game was over. Julian had turned on her. The acquisition was dead. But Chloe was a survivor, born from the cutthroat trading floors of Wall Street. "Fine," Chloe hissed, smoothing down her skirt, her chest heaving as she glared at me. "You win, Beatrice. You keep your pathetic little lotion company. You keep your factory. But you know what? I have $3 million in an account you can't touch. I'm going to walk out of these doors. I'm going to hire the best divorce attorneys in Chicago, and I'm going to take half of whatever Julian has left. Have fun sweeping up the ashes." She turned on her heel, her chin held high, determined to make a grand, dramatic exit through the sea of reporters. She took 3 steps toward the stage stairs. Then the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open again. 4 men and 2 women in dark, unassuming windbreakers walked into the room. They didn't look like journalists. They didn't look like hotel security. They wore badges clipped to their belts, the gold shields of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "Chloe Sinclair?" the lead agent called out, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Chloe stopped dead in her tracks. Her face, already pale, turned the color of chalk. "We are executing a federal arrest warrant," the agent stated, walking down the center aisle toward the stage, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and economic espionage across state and international lines. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Chloe took a step backward, shaking her head frantically. No, you can't do this. I want my lawyer. Julian, call my lawyer." Julian lowered his hands from his face. He looked at the woman he had loved, the woman who had manipulated him into betraying his own mother and poisoning his own people. "I don't have my phone, Chloe," Julian said quietly, his voice dead and hollow. "And you aren't my wife anymore." The FBI agents ascended the stairs. Chloe began to scream, thrashing wildly as they grabbed her arms. "Get your hands off me! I am a senior executive. Beatrice, you planned this. You orchestrated this." I watched with a heavy, stoic heart as they clicked the handcuffs securely around her wrists. "I didn't plan your greed, Chloe," I said softly as the agents marched her past me, her designer heels dragging against the carpet. "I just handed you the rope you used to hang yourself." The press went absolutely feral. Reporters shouted questions at the agents. Cameras recorded Chloe being perp-walked out of her own press conference in a ruined designer gown. It was a spectacular, unprecedented corporate downfall, playing out live on international television. When the doors finally closed behind the FBI, the ballroom felt strangely empty, despite the hundreds of people still standing there in shock. I looked back up at the stage. Julian was on his knees, his hands resting flat on the glass table, his head bowed. He had lost his wife, his title, his reputation, and the respect of his community all in the span of 30 minutes. Sterling stepped up beside me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "It's done, B. The board is legally paralyzed. The fraud is public. The shell company is exposed. We won." I looked at the scattered documents on the stage. I looked at the photos of the burned women still clutched in the hands of the journalists. "No, Sterling," I whispered, the adrenaline finally leaving my body, leaving me feeling every single one of my 68 years. "We didn't win. We just stopped the bleeding." I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders, and turned to face the gauntlet of flashing cameras. The real work hadn't even begun yet. The flashbulbs were still popping, the harsh white light reflecting off the abandoned glass table on the stage. The federal agents had hauled Chloe Sinclair out through the service elevators, but the ballroom was still packed with 400 journalists, influencers, and industry insiders who were staring at me, waiting to see what the deposed matriarch would do next. I didn't shrink. I didn't hide behind my lawyers. I walked up the 3 carpeted steps onto the stage. I picked up the microphone that Chloe had dropped. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press," I began, my voice steady, carrying the weight of a woman who had just watched her family tear itself apart. "Today you came to witness a corporate acquisition. Instead, you witnessed a rescue mission." The room was dead silent. Every camera lens was zoomed in on my face. For the last 14 months, the company I built in my kitchen, the company that bears my name and my legacy, was hijacked, I continued, looking directly into the bank of television cameras at the back of the room. The executive board, led by a woman who is now in federal custody, knowingly poisoned our products to artificially inflate profit margins. They betrayed our community. They burned the scalps of the very women who trusted us. A murmur went through the crowd, but I raised a hand, silencing them. Effective immediately, I am dissolving the current executive board of C&R Global. As the majority shareholder and the sole owner of the manufacturing facility and intellectual property, I am taking back full operational control. We are reverting to our true name, Crown and Roots Heritage. I took a deep breath. This next part was going to cost me millions, but my integrity was not for sale. Furthermore, I am ordering a total nationwide recall of all Crown and Roots products manufactured in the last 14 months. Every single jar, every single bottle. We will buy them back, and we will destroy them. We are halting all production today. We will not sell another ounce of product until my original, organic, patented formula is restored to the exact specifications I created 30 years ago. To the women who were hurt by this corporate greed, I see you. I am so deeply sorry. And I swear to you on my grandmother's grave, I will spend every dime I have left to make this right. I set the microphone down. I didn't take questions. I walked off that stage, flanked by Sterling and Denise, and walked out of the Four Seasons into the crisp Chicago air. The war was won, but the battlefield was covered in casualties. The next 6 months were a grueling, exhausting descent into corporate hell. The financial hit of the nationwide recall nearly bankrupted us. We had to empty the corporate reserves to pay the logistics companies to pull our tainted products from the shelves of every beauty supply store and major retailer in the country. Denise came back as my chief operating officer. The very first thing she did was rent 3 massive industrial dumpsters, park them behind our West Loop factory, and personally supervised the disposal of 200,000 units of the toxic synthetic garbage Chloe had manufactured. We had to renegotiate with our original suppliers in Ghana, begging them to trust us again after Chloe had unceremoniously dumped them. We had to hire back the line workers, the quality control experts, and the warehouse managers who actually cared about the people they were making products for. And then there was Julian. The press tore him to shreds. They called him the clueless CEO, the puppet who let his wife poison his own people. He resigned from the company the day after the press conference. He surrendered his entire severance package and his remaining equity shares to a victim restitution fund that Sterling set up for the women who had suffered chemical burns. The divorce was brutal. Chloe, true to her nature, fought like a cornered rat. Even from federal lockup, she was denied bail as a flight risk. She tried to drag Julian down with her, claiming he was the mastermind. But Sterling's forensic accounting proved Julian hadn't seen a dime of the Apex kickbacks. Julian lost his Hamptons house. He lost his bespoke suits. He lost the illusion of the man he thought he was. One rainy Tuesday evening in November, exactly 8 months after the gala, I was in my office at the factory. The building was quiet, smelling once again of rich, earthy shea butter and sweet orange oil. I was reviewing a batch of legal bills when there was a soft knock on my door. "Come in," I called out without looking up. The door opened. I froze. Standing in the doorway was my son. But it wasn't the slick, arrogant CEO who had stood on that stage. Julian was wearing a faded gray sweatshirt, heavy work boots, and a pair of worn-out jeans. He looked thinner, the sharp angles of his face pronounced by exhaustion. His eyes, usually so bright and confident, were hollowed out by months of public humiliation and profound, crushing guilt. "Mom," he said, his voice raspy. I set my pen down. I didn't rush to hug him. The wound between us was clean now, but it was still incredibly deep. "Hello, Julian. Have a seat." He didn't sit in the plush leather chair across from my desk. He stood there, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "I didn't come to ask for money. I sold my watch and my car. I paid off the last of Chloe's legal debt that I was saddled with. I'm completely broke." "I know," I said quietly. Sterling had kept me updated on his financial ruin. "I have an interview tomorrow," Julian continued, staring at the floor, "for a mid-level logistics manager at a shipping company out in the suburbs. It pays a fraction of what I used to make, but it's honest." He finally looked up at me, and my heart physically ached at the sheer brokenness in his expression. "I just wanted to come here and tell you to your face that I was a fool. I traded my soul for a seat at a table where I was never respected. I traded the only woman who ever truly loved me for a woman who saw me as an ATM. I am so sorry, Mom. I am so sorry." The tears finally fell, slipping down his cheeks. He didn't wipe them away. He just stood there, bearing the absolute weight of his failures. I stood up from my desk. I walked over to the closet in the corner of my office. I opened it and pulled out a heavy canvas work apron, the kind the floor workers wore to protect their clothes from the hot oils and waxes. I walked back to Julian and held it out to him. He looked at the apron, confused, wiping his eyes with the back of his sleeve. "What is this?" "You have 2 master's degrees, Julian," I said, my voice thick with emotion, but laced with the unbreakable steel of a mother's love. "But you don't know the first thing about this business. You don't know how the shea butter feels when it hits the right temperature. You don't know the names of the women packing the boxes on line 3. You wanted to be a CEO before you learned how to be a worker." I stepped closer, pressing the heavy canvas apron into his chest. "Cancel your interview tomorrow," I told him, looking deep into his dark eyes. "You report to Denise at 5 a.m. on Monday. You will be unloading the raw ingredient trucks on the loading dock. You will be making minimum wage. No executive access. No corner office. If you want to rebuild your life, you are going to rebuild it exactly the way I did. From the dirt up." Julian stared at the apron in his hands. He looked at the grease stains on the pockets, the frayed strings. For the first time in 5 years, the arrogant veneer completely cracked, replaced by something I hadn't seen since he was a little boy. Gratitude. He clutched the apron to his chest, dropped his head onto my shoulder, and wept. I wrapped my arms around my son, burying my face in his shoulder, letting the tears I had held back for 2 years finally fall. I forgave him, but I was going to make sure he earned his redemption. 18 months later, The roar of the machinery in the West Loop factory was deafening, but it was the most beautiful sound in the world. The massive stainless steel vats were humming, churning out the original, golden, pure Crown and Roots heritage formula. I walked out onto the catwalk overlooking the production floor. Below me, dozens of workers were moving with practiced rhythm, capping jars, sealing boxes, laughing over the loud hum of the conveyor belts. Down on the floor, near the massive cooling racks, was Julian. He was wearing the canvas apron, his sleeves rolled up, his forehead glistening with sweat. He was holding a clipboard, joking with Miss Patty, a 60-year-old line supervisor who had been with me for 2 decades. Julian wasn't wearing a Rolex. He was wearing a cheap digital watch, and his hands were calloused. But as he checked a batch of labels and gave Miss Patty a high five, I saw a genuine, easy smile light up his face. He was exhausted. He was at the bottom of the ladder. But he was free. Our relaunch had been a monumental success. When the community saw the real formula return, when they saw the transparency, the apologies, and the raw honesty of what we had survived, they didn't just forgive us. They rallied around us. We weren't a $250 million global conglomerate. We were smaller, leaner, but our roots had never been deeper. Chloe Sinclair was currently serving a 7-year sentence in a minimum security federal facility in Danbury, Connecticut, convicted of corporate espionage and wire fraud. L'Eclat Bouteille's stock took a massive hit when the Department of Justice launched a probe into their predatory acquisition practices. I leaned against the railing of the catwalk, looking at my factory, my people, and my son. I had lost everything, only to realize that the things I lost were never truly mine to begin with. The wealth, the prestige, the flashy galas, those were just leaves blowing in the wind. The roots were the people. The roots were the integrity of the work. And as long as you own your roots, nobody can ever tear your tree down. YouTube outro scene. Fade to the host sitting in a cozy, elegant living room setting, speaking directly to the camera. If you are watching this right now, my beautiful sisters, I want you to take a deep breath and hear me. We spend our entire lives pouring our magic into other people. We build homes, we raise children, we scrub the floors, we work the late shifts, and we build legacies out of dust and sheer willpower. And sometimes the very people we sacrificed for will look at our gray hair, look at our tired hands, and decide that we are obsolete. They will try to take the crown right off your head, thinking you are too old or too weak to fight back. Beatrice Washington learned the hard way that a mother's love should never mean surrendering your power. She didn't let her age, her heartbreak, or a boardroom of slick executives erase 30 years of her blood, sweat, and tears. She fought back, not with screaming and crying, but with cold, hard boundaries and unshakable self-worth. And she taught her son the greatest lesson a mother can teach a grown man. Respect is not inherited. It is earned. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever felt pushed aside, underestimated, or betrayed by the people you trusted most, I want you to leave a comment down below. Tell me your story. Let this community know that you are still here and you are still standing. Do not let anyone, not a boss, not a daughter-in-law, not even your own children, make you feel like your season is over. You own your roots. You own your dirt. If you loved this story of resilience and justice, please hit that like button, share this video with a sister who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to the channel. We tell stories here about women who refuse to be broken. Because life doesn't end at 60, my friends. For some of us, that's just when the real fight begins. Stay strong, stay beautiful, and protect your crown. I'll see you in the next video.